Hello and welcome to another Debating Europe Citizens panel. My name is Joe Ludobarsky and I'm editor-in-chief of Debating Europe, and I'm here with an online panel of 3 citizens and civil society representatives. And today we're going to be talking about climate and energy, and more specifically, how can Europe achieve a just transition to energy independence from Russian fossil fuels and reach its targets of climate neutrality by 2050? Now, Debating Europe is a project of the think tank Friends of Europe, and Friends of Europe is holding its annual Climate and Energy Summit in Brussels on 14th of June. And the idea behind this citizens panel is that we're going to have a kind of conversation and see if we can come up with some questions for the participants at the summit on 14th of June. Like what questions might we have for some of the policymakers and experts who are going to be at that summit? Let's introduce the panel. I'll go around kind of as I see you on my Zoom screen. Marie, perhaps you want to just introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. So I'm Marie Pouliquin. I'm currently a member of JEF Europe Association, fighting for democracy and citizenship within the EU. And I'm more specifically one of the co-chair of the Green Transition Task Force.
Welcome, Marie. Good to have you with us. And Kostyan, hello, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Kostyan. I actually am working as a national coordinator for a KfW project here in Albania. I'm also junior EU ambassador.
Welcome, Kostyan. Good to have you. And João, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello. My name is João. I'm speaking from Portugal today. I represent Youth Plus, a youth association from a local/regional level. And so a bit out of context here with Marie and Kostyan, but we'll see.
But that's what makes it brilliant. I love to. So for me, having a diverse set of kind of backgrounds and positions, I think is more interesting. It makes for a more interesting debate. So let's see. Okay, right. So we've got half an hour. We're going to kind of follow the format of the Energy Summit a little bit. There are 3 sessions at the Energy Summit, and the first of them is on, what they call in the summit energy sovereignty. Others have called it energy independence. I mean, if we're having this debate right in the context of rising energy prices, costs are going up, people are feeling it, households are feeling it, and that's being driven in part by the war in Ukraine. Okay, but also in the longer term, the argument is we need to reach climate neutrality by 2050. We want to reduce our share of imported fossil fuels, and we want to transition to a kind of greener economy. So I guess maybe I'll go around and just, can we have maybe some initial thoughts on where you are on this at the moment? Like, I suppose my opening question would be like, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic in terms of, and what do you think are the key things that we should, maybe let's put it this way, that the climate summit should be talking about? What is it that it's important when we talk about kind of strengthening the EU's energy sovereignty? What are you worried about? And by the way, just so you're clear, you can come at this from any angle you want. If you want to absolutely trash the idea of energy sovereignty, go for it. If you're very supportive, that's fine. Very, very open to any comments and questions you have. But what do you think maybe are the things that are worrying you, the things that, when I talk about, okay, strengthening the EU's energy sovereignty, what comes to your mind first of all? Maybe João, we'll start with you and we'll go kind of backwards. So João, what's your, when I say, strengthening the EU's energy sovereignty, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I mean, I'm my state of mind, I would say it's apprehensive, because we're speaking about cutting Russian oil, and that's all right. I understand that. But at the same time, what's going to substitute that Russian oil? It's going to be Saudi Arabia oil, United Arab, the Emirates oil. What's going to be? Because if we're going to substitute from a country that is an autocratic regimen to another country that is also an autocratic regimen, we might go and do the same thing over and over. So what are we speaking about sovereignty in terms of energy in Europe? Because we live in a very peaceful place. We enjoy from these peaceful times ever since the end of the World War II. And when I think about it, democracy in Europe is such a wonderful thing, and we need to preserve it. But in order to do that, we need to be able to live in this global world, and everything is going to become ever more global. So how do we balance that, the globalization, and at the same time will be sovereignty, and we closed our borders? How do we manage this? This is my main concern right now.
That's a brilliant question. The geopolitics of energy, right? What does this mean for that and for peace? I think that's an excellent question. Really, really good question. Kostyan, what about you? Like anything to add, or are you coming from a similar place?
Yeah, just wanted to add that in a retrospective, let's say view, 1 year ago we were discussing about the vaccines and how EU could provide to every citizen of EU the vaccine. And we knew also back then that Europe was not energy independent. And then literally overnight, let's say in one night, in 24 February, Europe shifted its energy strategy and now seeks to become more independent and flexible. Of course, but in a long term, European Green Deal is the main, let's say, idea and the main project that will make Europe independent. The question now is what Europe is going to do in a short term. And I also agree with Joao, what he said, because let's say if we talk about Saudi Arabia or other countries, EU has also a strong position on human rights, and we know that. And it's like a dilemma. If Europe will lower, let's say, the approach on human rights, and since it needs oil and gas from those states, so I think in short term there is a problem with energy independence.
Okay, this is again a good question, and links in with what Joao was saying. Okay, your energy strategy, which you've developed over decades, let's be honest, is suddenly changing overnight, and there's this sort of scramble to kind of to catch up with that. And are the answers convincing? I don't know. It's a good question. Marie, what about yourself? Are you in line more or less with Kostyan or Joao?
Indeed, at some point on which I would be happy to reply. Indeed, when you mentioned, Constance, the need as a short-term urgency that we have related to this independency problem, the first word that come to my mind is solidarity. This is also what matters in the EU. This is why we have this energy union. I believe that the strength of the EU is that it's managed for now to remain kind of to manage solidarity within the EU to cope with this issue. That's the first thing on the short term that we should do. And then also maybe on the long term perspective, accelerating the rollout of renewable energies is also, I think, something that we should come out as one of the key priorities, or at least maybe that's something that the EU has already been doing for a few years now, and it should just go a bit further. And the third thing also, as this independency should not come at the also bring us back to the question of how much.
Marie, sorry, your audio keeps cutting out. I don't know if it might be a
is
plug.
It good now? Sorry.
Yeah, was it just me? Was everyone?
Or maybe you lost me shortly.
Perhaps. Yes, you were just making your third point. I'm sorry to interrupt. You had talked about solidarity, accelerating the energy transition, and then you just started your third point. So.
Sorry, my apologies. Third point was just on affordability and how this energy sovereignty should not come at the cost of citizens, and it's a perspective that we should always keep in mind when we talk about energy sovereignty as well, to put it shorter.
Excellent, perfect. No, I think that's really interesting. And are you optimistic when it comes to solidarity? Do you think, so we've had this Repower EU, which is this big kind of, there was a summit in Versailles, which Macron convened. France is holding the rotating presidency at the moment, and lots of kind of fantastic words about solidarity. But do you think that when it comes to the money, and we'll talk about financing a bit, do you think that solidarity will be there? Are you kind of optimistic that we'll see that solidarity?
I think we don't have any other choice. And I think for now, maybe with a reverse flow and the kind of common reserves, that maybe is something that can be proposed at EU level, can be a solution. So far, I think when somebody mentions the vaccines strategy is something that we can replicate also with energy, for instance.
Okay, let's move on to the second part, the second session, the topic which is about creating the conditions for climate innovation. So this kind of touches on what Kostyan and Joao were talking about, maybe, because Joao had in his talking about the geopolitics, what is the point in swapping Russian oil for Saudi oil, right? Is that what's going to happen? And Kostyan made a sort of similar point. But I suppose that the technological response to that is, no, we have clean tech. You don't have to necessarily swap fossil fuels for fossil fuels. You could invest in heat pumps. You could invest in solar panels. You could invest in kind of battery storage technology and even insulation, retrofitting houses and so on. And these would help you both in terms of energy supply and energy efficiency to kind of, you wouldn't necessarily have to swap like for like. Now that's the kind of utopian vision, and again we'll talk about how to finance that in a bit, but just in terms of this kind of technological approach and where technology could fit in, does that convince, maybe I'll start with you, Kostyan, does that kind of convince you at all? Are your fears about swapping fossil fuels for fossil fuels, what do you think about this idea that actually this could be an opportunity to really kind of roll out at speed and scale some of these kind of clean technologies?
Yeah, I agree with you, but this is an opportunity because, when you reach the lower point, then you start to think harder and start to improvise. And of course, technology in this part where we are is a solution that can help a lot. And we have to keep in mind that Europe has been in the front row for innovation and for university research. And of course, when you think in a long term again, I strongly believe that we will have a lot, let's say, of progress. But again, the important point is what Europe is going to do in short term. When we talk about energy efficiency, of course, but it will take some time. And especially we have to know that Europe is not, let's say, a unique state. There are parts in Western Europe which are more developed, while parts in Southern Europe are less developed. I come from a region where not all of the countries are part of the EU, some are part of the EU, some are not part of the EU, but still a lot of young people are leaving to Western Europe. And of course, also in the energy sector, there is a lot of differences between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And solidarity, again, here is really important.
I was going to ask you, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to kind of ask you whether you thought that solidarity could make a difference on that, because as you say, I mean, different countries have different, levels of reliance on coal, for example, different kind of economies, like all sorts of regional variations, clearly. So it's interesting, whether solidarity could be one component in that, and also one response to that, and also. One of the things that keeps coming up when I talk to people in the commission or kind of in the parliament is this idea about kind of having deepening interconnectivity between different European countries when it comes to energy grids, and there's been hesitance around this, and partly it could be to do with protecting national energy kind of companies and a reluctance to Europeanize energy markets. So what do you say to this this argument that okay, solidarity is one thing, but you also need to kind of open up markets to European competition? Like, what do you think, Kostyan? Is that something that that you have a kind of a position on?
Yeah, I have no problem with open market, in fact, and of course competition is hugely important in a democracy, but solidarity, especially when we talk about not a normal situation, we are at war, like Europe is at war, even though it's confined within Ukraine, we are in war. And I think that a high-level EU official said that, no, it was a minister in Italy, said that I fully agree that Europe is functioning in a war economy, and solidarity, of course, is more needed than ever. We are not in a normal situation, let's say.
Yeah, that's a good point. If we wanted to open up energy markets to competition, maybe if we'd done that 10 years ago, we might be ready now. That's an interesting point. Joao, what about you? The technology, you said that you're worried about the kind of the geopolitics of this, that almost if we reduce, I mean, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, so tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but maybe if we reduce our dependence on Russian oil, does that make us less safe? Because, dependence is two ways, right? Not only are we dependent on Russian oil and gas, but Russia is dependent on euros coming from us when we buy their gas. So there's a relationship there. If you sever that relationship, does that make it less safe? That's kind of the one question I would ask you. And the other one is about technology. Are you as kind of tech optimistic as, I'm relatively tech optimistic. I do see this as an opportunity. It sounds like Kostyan does too. Are you also kind of as optimistic, or are you like, no, it's going to be fossil fuels? We're going to substitute fossil fuels with more fossil fuels. Joao, what do you say?
I'm quite pessimistic, not because I don't trust the innovation side of it, but as a scientist, science takes time and a lot of money. So I wonder, how are we going to finance this innovation sector? Because we've been quite, skeptic about financing innovation up to this point, and I don't see it changing, even though we are functioning in this wartime economy, as Kostyan was saying. Because my main issue right now is short-term energy. How are we going to secure our energy in these maybe 5-10 years? Because after that, science is going to evolve and we're going to get the technology that we need to be more efficient and more independent. But in this short term, how are we going to substitute the Russian oil? Because we look at Germany, and I understand the efforts that they are making to reduce the oil from Russia, but they have a quite big dependence. I think it's 40% of their energy comes from Russia. So how are we managing this? And then we have this dichotomy, the Western and Eastern Europe side. And I still remember, as a Portuguese person, the financial crisis. There was this dichotomy in Europe, and solidarity was not there. What we saw with the COVID-19 vaccine was amazing, but I don't think we're going to see that with energy as well. And as you were saying, Joe, about the opening the markets, that brings up the question of federalism, and Marie can speak more about that, but I don't think we're going on in that direction. But if Marie can pitch in on this one, I would appreciate.
Marie, pitch in on this one.
No, indeed, thank you for mentioning also federalism and how it can be a solution indeed. On this, clearly, we can see also, to make the link with the question that's related to technologies. Innovation is one clearly of the fields where EU coming together have a lot of added value. It's not about one. We've seen that most of the innovations that could be developed through bigger consortia at EU level also allowed to have more competitiveness. And since you were mentioning the short-term aspect, we will not get fast enough if each country invents his own wheel. We have to be all of this together. Hydrogen and batteries, for instance, there are European consortia working on this. Companies from all over Europe. And this, I think, it's when you see at the same time solidarity and innovation efforts put it together, and it goes faster. And to me, it's also when, so to speak, a little step in the direction of federalism, when you see all the efforts put together to achieve one common objectives, if it can answer your question. But
it
I will
does.
also be
please
sorry, to also answer the question on if technologies and like, of course, in the short term, of course, it can help. But for instance, when it comes to more flexible grids, here digitalization has a very important role to play, clearly. But you also mentioned before the behavioral aspect, which shouldn't be underestimated. So to me, what we need is truly to fight on the two sides. On the behavioral aspect, sobriety is something that's very important, and technologies will be also key if one wants to accelerate the rollout of renewable energies, for instance, and better adapt the grids and make them more resilient, as you mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And on the behavioral question as well, the IEA recently came out with a set of recommendations, I think, working with the Commission on what households and maybe also businesses can do in order to cut energy consumption. And a lot of them are very similar things that we would want to do if we wanted to reduce consumption of energy in general. So, and also make our cities nicer places to live in, such as car-free Sundays, you know, more public transport, these sort of things. So it's interesting, this question of whether what's happening in Ukraine might kind of supercharge those efforts to reach climate neutrality by 2050. We knew we had to do this anyway. Maybe this will kind of push us into that. And we saw that we can work together. We saw it. I mean, we were talking about the COVID-19 response. Okay, so it can be done. Now, this brings us to the final question about how to pay for it and whether we can do it. Because to me, it feels like we did it for COVID-19. You know, we had this real kind of collective response, which surprised a lot of people. And there's a question mark over whether we will have this joined up. Maybe I'm pessimistic, I don't know. But to me, it feels like there's a question mark over whether we will do this again as a continent. I don't know. I can see you're going to have different positions on this. I'll go around this question of how do we finance what we're talking about, because we need to do it in a short time. I mean, for one thing, people are struggling to keep the, you know, pay the bills, right? And we're going into winter. This is going to become more acute. If energy prices stay where they are, it's going to drive inflation. It's going to drive food price inflation. It's going to drive, you know, cost of living is going to go up. It's going to have a huge impact on people's lives. And so if this is messed up, I think it's going to push. It's going to, maybe I'm again too pessimistic, but I think it'll push kind of people into more radical politics, into kind of less political stability. I think that it will certainly not lead to the kind of federalism that Marie's talking about. I don't think so. I think it could lead to a kind of nastier form of politics. I mean, I'm putting my cards on the table there. You may disagree, but let's talk about how we pay for it and if this is going to happen. So Joao, maybe we'll start with you. Optimistic or pessimistic? You've been pessimistic all this way through. You're still pessimistic?
I'm still pessimistic because when we think about energy and cost of living, we need to think about, again, the dichotomy of Europe, because Southern and Northern Europe and Eastern Europe are very different aspects of Europe, because we're such a big continent that the differences between countries are there. And the more we go into this wartime economy, and we saw that with COVID, the countries that are poorer will feel the heat the most. And we are witnessing that right now as well, because we can talk about energy and the cost of living prices, but if we talk about that, I mean, in a large city, let's say, if we talk about that in Paris or Berlin, the issue is totally different. If we speak about countryside, let's say Croatia, I mean, it's going to be a totally different answer between the countries. And I guess that what Marie was saying about solidarity, we do need that. And it's going to be the thing that makes the difference right now. Because without solidarity, I think we are at this point of make or break for the European Union, the same way we were in COVID-19, but we managed COVID-19. So I'm a bit pessimistic, but I'm hopeful that we're going to be the same way about the energy crisis right now.
Because the debate that is going on in capitals, and it's a tense debate, is about collective borrowing and whether the EU as a whole should collectively borrow in order to invest, or whether there is the kind of fiscal headroom, as it's called, in each capital to borrow themselves and to do more. And I think this gets to this question of solidarity. And, you know, do we, because again, it comes to this question of who pays and how is it financed? And you can see, for example, I think there's you know, the fear in Germany, for example, that Germany will be asked to pay for everything, whereas other countries are saying our debt to GDP is just, we don't have the space. We've gone through the financial crisis. We're on our knees and we haven't recovered from that. And now then we went through the pandemic. And we're having to do this again. And then I hear people saying, oh, we'll finance it through CBAM, for example, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. But one of the things that's happening with CBAM is there's discussions about expanding that to housing, to transport. Does that drive up prices? It's so kind of complicated. And ultimately, everyone's arguing about who's going to pay and how we're going to finance it. And I don't know if anyone really knows. Let's go, we're almost wrapping up, but I want to hear from Kostyan and Marie on this as well, your kind of thoughts about this, who pays, how do we finance it, and at speed, because I think we've all agreed, I think we're all on the same page, this needs to be done quickly.
Yeah.
Kostyan, go, and then Marie.
This question, who pays, remind me of Trump that said about the Mexico wall, but jokes aside, I think that in a short term, I am really pessimistic, because if we think about 1 minute, like Europe is at war now, and it seems that it will last longer than it was fought in February. So if this war continues to go on into the winter, let's say, and the relations between EU and Russia continue to deteriorate, then of course we are going to be in front of a critical winter, and climate neutrality cannot be reached, let's say, in just some months. And what will happen? Probably we'll get some support from US in one side, and the other side, countries will go back maybe to a nuclear energy, maybe Germany, who knows? If the situation goes critical, maybe Germany will again open its nuclear plants or coal plants. So in the short term, I'm really pessimistic, and there is no solution possible, let's say, towards this climate neutrality. In a long term, of course, that funds will be found, because it's the only solution for Europe. Europe don't have, let's say, the resources to be energy, let's say, to have energy. So it's just a matter of time that green energy is the only solution. But in short term, it's a critical moment, I think.
Okay, I'm going to give the final word to Marie. I think I'm going to try to, because I think if I understand what you said earlier, Marie, you're the most optimistic one on this panel, I think. But also, some of that optimism is almost coming from what Kostyan's just said, because Kostyan said there are no short-term solutions. In the long term, he's more optimistic maybe, but there are no short-term solutions. But if I understand your kind of earlier point, that is going to force countries to act, because it's not good enough to say there are no short-term solutions. We are heading into this winter, and there's going to be huge kind of cost of living crisis coming up, and so we need to find solutions. So the answer, oh, we can't do it, is just not good enough, and that will force action. Is that your position?
I would first start from the fact that each time there were crises in the EU, then countries had no other choice but to sit all together. Maybe, okay, like there is kind of, if I take, for instance, two last crises, refugee crisis, all spent together, there were no really common solutions. Other path is the COVID crisis, where surprisingly, everybody come to an agreement and took one of the most federalist decisions ever. So I would like to hope that in a crisis mode, when it's come to energy, the EU would take the COVID crisis path rather than the Dublin, if I can say, path. And hence, for now, what I have seen hints more toward the same solution as we've seen with the COVID crisis. The EU Commission reacted, if one think, very fast with the first, if I remember correctly, a kind of toolbox. So member states could immediately take very concrete solution targeting the price of citizens. So in this time, I think, and even with REPowerEU, I think the EU is putting an immense effort to act as quick as possible. But you're right, we need a crisis to make people agree and work faster together. And this is quite clear. When it comes, will also Germany reopen nuclear plants? I don't know, but I would rather be surprised that such a decision could be taken. But let's see. I don't think that's. I do hope that the countries will be better coordinated this time. And also another point to take into account when it comes to financing. You all mentioned it, all two of you. the own resource topic is absolutely key. Who will finance it? Hopefully not the citizens, of course, companies, maybe through the CBAM, but we'll see that the debate is still rather ongoing. But clearly that the EU has its own financial resource is, I believe, something that should be also applied to the energy topic. Especially when it comes to this common borrowing, this indeed could be the next step to go. We already had the kind of reverse flow going from one country to another, so this would be the next step. So that's why I'm also a bit optimistic. I mean, the tools that the EU, I think member states, Commission, civil society, they know the urgency and they know the tools that are at hand. When it comes to financing, the EU has already a lot of fund. House Europe, the recovery fund, Next Generation EU is already a lot of money that has been put to the table. So on this, I'm not really afraid of the EU lacking money. It's more how do we put it together to ensure solidarity and affordability for citizens. And as soon as the EU maybe allow some flexibility to cope with the high prices for citizens and also give them new tools to better manage their gas consumption, for instance, I think there is a safe way out. Maybe a long one, a tedious one. The negotiation when it came to COVID crisis lasted for weeks. I don't expect we get rid of Putin anytime soon. So of course it's going to be a lengthy process, but if we have the right milestones at the right times, and countries that for now I still still keeping dialogue to each other, I think it can work.
Thank you.
It was the
Thank you.
optimist word of the end.
Thank you. No, I'm glad. I'm very happy to have a more optimistic note to end on. And I like also the way you summarized it. Take the COVID crisis route, not the Dublin crisis route, because that reminds us, you know, there was this response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which you know, as slow and I think it got off to a shaky start. I think everyone would agree, but I do think that ultimately there was an agreement, and I have been following European politics for more than 10 years, and I was surprised by the speed of it. So so yeah, okay, so that's a positive and optimistic note to end on. Let's stop there. But we're gonna, if you guys can stay on the call, I'm going to just record some questions with you ahead so that we can put them to policymakers at the summit. But for those watching at home, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the debate, and it's also given you some kind of questions to ponder. If you do have those, then please leave them in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe. I'd be very happy if you did that. And I hope to see you in a similar Zoom session like this, asking your own questions and to get involved in the debate. And we'll include links in the notes so that you can see how to do that. So thank you very much, and until next time.